Usually when we think about a massive revolution, there is this expectation of, like, fireworks.
Oh, yeah, totally. You
Yeah.
picture the charismatic founder and all that chaotic energy.
Exactly. Like the breaking of all the old rules, it's thrilling.
Mhm.
It's a real movement.
Right.
You see it in tech startups. You see it in political uprisings, even in underground music scenes.
Yeah, it's the honeymoon phase of disruption, really.
The honeymoon phase, I like that.
Because the rules don't apply to you,
Yeah.
right? Because you're the one tearing up the rule book in the first place.
And it is completely intoxicating. Like, people are just drawn to that pure, unrefined energy.
They absolutely are.
But I want you, the listener, to really think about what happens, the morning after the revolution.
When the dust settles.
Right. The founder steps away, or maybe the initial momentum just hits a massive wall.
Yeah.
And suddenly that exact same disruptive energy that got you off the ground, well, it becomes your biggest liability.
You go from needing fireworks to needing someone who actually knows how to run a payroll system.
Yes. Someone to run payroll. That is the ultimate test of any movement, right?
It really is. It is the classic institutional transition crisis.
Which is such a fragile moment.
Incredibly fragile. How do you build walls to protect the fire without, accidentally suffocating it?
Yeah.
How do you transition from this radical first-generation insurgency into a durable, multi-generational institution?
And the reality is, most of them just don't survive it.
No, they don't.
They splinter, or they burn out, or they just kind of fade into obscurity.
All right.
But today on the Deep Dive, we are looking at one that didn't just survive. It entirely reshaped the world.
It really did.
We are unpacking the survival strategy of early Christianity.
Specifically, we're looking at that exact pivot point. The moment the original apostles began to exit the stage, and the movement realized it needed an infrastructure.
All right. And to do this, we have this massive stack of historical, archaeological, and theological data compiled by Chris R. Velazquez.
It's an incredible compilation of notes.
It is, and the focus of this research is a trio of ancient texts. They're known as the Pastoral Epistles. So that's 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus.
Though, we should probably clarify for the listener right away that calling them the Pastoral Epistles is, well, it's an anachronism.
Wait, an anachronism meaning it's a label that was applied much later?
Yeah, exactly. That collective title really only gained traction in, the 18th century.
Oh, wow, so way later.
Way later. When you read them in their original context, they aren't just polite, administrative guidelines for rural pastors.
Right, they're not a boring HR manual.
Not at all. They are urgent wartime field manual.
Wartime. I love that. That is exactly the vibe I got from the notes.
Yeah.
Because the Christianity they describe is operating in this high-stakes cultural battleground.
Absolutely. They are trying to keep this explosive startup alive.
Alive when, internal corruption and massive external societal pressures are threatening to just tear the whole thing apart.
They are navigating an incredibly fragile pivot. The transition from the missionary age of the first apostles to the institutional maturation of a global church.
Right. But, before we can even get into the mechanics of how they actually pulled this off, we have to address the elephant in the room.
We do. We have to talk about the origin story.
We have to talk about where these letters actually came from, because the whole who wrote it question isn't just a piece of, ancient trivia.
Oh, no. It is a genuine, heavily contested mystery in modern scholarship.
It's a huge deal. And I want to lay this out completely impartially for you listening, because the debate itself reveals so much about how we reconstruct history.
It really is a masterclass in historical methodology.
So the first view is what you might call the traditional baseline assumption. This view holds that Paul the Apostle, the famous founder of countless early churches, that he personally wrote these letters in the early 60s AD.
Right. And that position is largely built on the internal claims of the texts themselves.
Like what they actually say on the page.
Yeah, exactly. If you open up 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, or Titus, the very first verse of each letter explicitly says, Paul, an apostle of Christ Jesus.
So it claims authorship right out of the gate.
It does. It's not hiding it.
And the historical timeline for that works out, right? If we look at the timeline reconstructed from ancient sources, Paul is released from his first Roman imprisonment around, AD 62?
Roughly, yes. AD 62 is the general consensus for that view.
Right. So he travels, he writes 1 Timothy and Titus from Macedonia to his associates who are managing these crisis zones.
Correct.
And then he gets arrested again. He's thrown into a much harsher Roman prison. And he writes to Timothy right before the Emperor Nero executes him around AD 67.
Yeah, so that is the established chronological framework for Pauline authorship.
Makes sense.
It does. It places the letters at the very end of his life, functioning as his final organizational instructions, like a personal last will and testament.
Okay, so that seems super straightforward. But then we have the second view, which the source material points out is held by a massive portion of modern critical scholars.
A very significant portion, yes.
They look at these exact same texts and conclude that Paul absolutely did not write them. They argue these are pseudonymous writings.
Right, meaning they were written under a false name or a pen name long after Paul was dead.
Which, I gotta be honest, immediately to a modern ear, that sounds like a forgery.
Right, it sounds deceptive.
It sounds like someone is running a scam, like identity theft.
I completely understand why it sounds that way, but the research really stresses that we have to be careful not to project, 21st century copyright anxiety onto the first century Mediterranean world.
Okay, fair enough.
In antiquity, writing under the name of a revered teacher wasn't always intended to deceive people. It was often a highly recognized literary convention.
So it was more of an homage, like a student writing in the voice of their master to, I don't know, apply the master's teachings to a new situation.
Precisely. The concept of a philosophical school was very common back then.
Like Plato or something.
Yeah, exactly. You had Pythagorean schools, Platonic schools. The argument here is that there was a Pauline school.
Okay, so a group of his followers.
Right, a group of disciples who survived him, preserved his theology, and then around the turn of the 2nd century, maybe 80, 90 to 100, they drafted these letters in his name.
To address new crises that Paul himself never lived to see.
Exactly.
But wait, why make that jump? Like, if the letter says, I am Paul, why do scholars spend their entire careers trying to prove it wasn't him?
It comes down to a really intense forensic analysis of the text. Scholars point to 3 major discrepancies.
Okay, lay them on me.
You've got vocabulary, stylistic flow, and advanced ecclesial development.
Let's break those down for the listeners. Start with vocabulary. We're talking about like a few different words here and there.
No, we're talking about a significant statistical anomaly.
Really? That big of a difference?
Yeah. If you run a linguistic analysis on these 3 letters, compared to the undisputed letters of Paul, like Romans or Galatians, you find a massive cluster of unique words.
Huh.
There are dozens of Greek terms used in the pastorals that Paul never uses anywhere else in his entire body of work.
Okay, I want to push back on that a bit, just playing devil's advocate.
Go for it.
I don't write an email to my boss the same way I write a text to my best friend.
Right, your register changes.
Exactly. So if Paul is writing a highly technical organizational manual to his close associates at the very end of his life, wouldn't his vocabulary naturally change from when he was writing a fiery theological treatise to a massive congregation 10 years earlier?
And that is exactly the defense raised by those who hold to Pauline authorship.
Oh, really?
Yes. They argue that context dictates vocabulary. If you change the subject matter from abstract theology to, church administration, of course you're going to use new words.
But the critical scholars don't buy that explanation.
Many don't, because it's not just the vocabulary, it's the underlying style of the writing.
What do you mean by style?
Well, the undisputed letters of Paul are famous for being deeply impassioned, argumentative, and sometimes just beautifully chaotic.
Right, lots of run-on sentences.
Exactly. He interrupts himself, he goes on long theological tangents, he uses this intense dialectical reasoning.
Yeah, he writes like a guy pacing around a room, just aggressively dictating to a scribe.
That is the perfect way to describe it.
Yeah.
But the pastoral epistles don't feel like that at all.
How do they feel?
The Greek is smoother, it's much calmer. The sentences are constructed with more of a quiet, settled rhythm.
Okay, I see.
It feels less like a man pacing a room and more like a committee carefully drafting a constitution.
Wow, okay. That is a stark difference. And that brings us to the third point, right? The advanced ecclesial development, the whole church structure thing.
Right. When you read these letters, you see a highly organized blueprint for leadership.
Lots of rules.
Lots of rules. There are strict qualifications for overseers, formal rosters for enrolled widows, clear protocols for paying and disciplining elders.
It's very administrative.
Very. And critical scholars argued this level of bureaucratic institutionalization simply didn't exist in the 60s AD. They argue it reflects a 2nd century reality.
But again, just looking at this from a startup mentality, if a movement is growing exponentially across the Roman Empire, doesn't it make sense that within 30 years they'd realize, hey, we need some managers?
It's a fair point.
Like, it doesn't seem impossible to me that an aging founder would start obsessing over organizational charts right before he dies.
It's certainly not impossible, and that's why the debate remains so incredibly vibrant today.
Yeah.
Furthermore, those who defend Pauline authorship point to the hyper-specific historical details in the texts.
Oh man, the personal details are wild. The letters name specific antagonists like Hymenaeus and Alexander.
Yes, very specific callouts.
And then in 2 Timothy, the author asks Timothy to bring him a specific heavy winter cloak that he left in Troas with a guy named Carpus. And he specifically asks for his parchment scrolls.
Right. And so the argument there is, if this is a late first century disciple writing a broad theological treatise in Paul's name, why invent a random detail about a forgotten winter coat?
Exactly. It feels too organic.
It feels too embedded in the gritty reality of a traveling missionary to be the calculated fiction of a later school.
It's just so fascinating. But let's look at the physical evidence for a second.
Yeah.
Because when we dig into the historical research from the source material, there is a manuscript mystery that makes this debate even more complicated.
Oh, the manuscript evidence is wild.
I want to talk about Codex Sinaiticus and Papyrus 46, because this just blew my mind.
This is where textual criticism becomes essentially archaeological detective work.
It really is.
Yeah.
So Codex Sinaiticus is a massive deal. It's a 4th century Greek manuscript.
A very famous one.
And it is widely considered the oldest surviving complete copy of the New Testament. And in that massive, beautifully preserved book, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, and Titus are right there.
Right. No question about their status.
By the 300s AD, the church universally accepted them as canonical and authoritative.
Exactly.
But if we rewind the clock further, we find P46. This is a collection of papyrus fragments from much earlier, right? Roughly the early 200s AD.
Correct. It is one of the oldest collections of Paul's letters ever found.
And the Pastoral Epistles are nowhere to be found in it. They are completely missing.
Completely absent.
Now, I have to be honest here. If I am looking at this like a prosecutor, the fact that these disputed letters are missing from the earliest collection we have is a massive flashing red flag.
It certainly looks like a smoking gun.
To me, that screams that they were added later.
But this is why you really have to understand the physical reality of how books were made and preserved in the ancient world.
Okay, tell me why I'm wrong.
Well, you are looking at P46 as if it's a PDF file with missing chapters.
Right.
But it is a physical object made of reeds that has been sitting in the dirt for 2 millennia.
Okay, so talk to me about the dirt. What is the actual physical state of this document?
P46 is a codex, which is an ancient book with bound pages, unlike a scroll. It was made by folding sheets of papyrus into quires.
Okay, so it has a spine, basically.
Yes, but it is heavily fragmentary. It is literally falling apart, and more importantly, it is missing its concluding leaves.
Wait, missing its concluding leaves?
Yes. The physical book ends abruptly before the collection of letters was finished. The back pages are just gone.
Wait, so it's not that we have the back cover and the letters just aren't inside. The actual back half of the book literally rotted away.
Exactly. Cambridge scholars who have analyzed the physical binding of P46 explicitly warn against using its contents to prove the Pastoral Epistles didn't exist yet.
Oh, wow.
We simply do not know if those 3 letters were originally tucked into the back pages that succumbed to time and moisture, or if they were intentionally excluded.
Man. So I can't use missing pages to prove they were never written.
You really can.
That is so frustrating for anyone wanting a clean, simple answer, but I guess it's intellectually honest.
It is. And here is the synthesis of all this debate, according to the research. Whether you believe a brilliant disciple drafted these to honor Paul in AD 95, or you believe an aging Paul dictated them from a damp cell in AD 65, their function in history is identical.
What do you mean by function?
Regardless of who physically held the pen, these documents successfully orchestrated the most precarious transition in religious history.
Moving from phase 1 to phase 2.
Yes. They moved a chaotic, charismatic New Covenant community from an era of unchecked proclamation into an era of durable ecclesial embodiment.
From movement to institution. Which brings me right back to that startup analogy.
It's the perfect analogy.
Imagine a fast-moving tech company that has totally disrupted an industry. Everyone is working 80-hour weeks. There are no job titles. The CEO is literally sleeping under a desk.
Chaos, but productive chaos.
Right. But suddenly they scale. They have 10,000 employees across 50 countries. If they don't establish standard operating procedures, if they don't codify their values, the whole thing will collapse into absolute anarchy.
And that is exactly how the letters frame it. They introduce a profound new metaphor for the community,
Which is
the household of God. You see this explicitly in 1 Timothy 3.15.
a household of God.
Yes, they are no longer just a wandering band of disciples. They are building a household that needs to withstand the test of centuries.
But you cannot understand the rules of a household unless you understand the neighborhood it's built in.
Oh, absolutely. Context is everything here.
We can't just read these letters as abstract floating theology. We have to look at the hostile, intensely competitive environments where these early leaders were actually stationed.
The urban jungles of antiquity.
The urban jungles, I love that.
If you don't understand the socioeconomic pressures of these cities, the instructions in these letters will seem completely arbitrary or even regressive.
So let's go to ground zero. We're going to look at where Timothy was stationed, Ephesus.
A fascinating city.
And if you're listening, I want you to wipe away whatever image you have of some quaint, dusty, ancient village. The historical data paints Ephesus as an absolute juggernaut.
It really was. It was one of the greatest metropolises of the Roman Empire, located in Western Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey.
It's a massive harbor city, right? It controls the trade routes. It's wealthy. It's cosmopolitan.
It's very wealthy.
But the defining feature of Ephesus, the thing that gave the city its entire identity, was the Temple of Artemis.
Artemis, or Diana in the Roman pantheon, right. This temple wasn't just a large local church. It was one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world.
Seriously, one of the 7 wonders.
It was a staggering architectural achievement.
And it wasn't just a place to pray. The research shows this temple functioned essentially as the central bank of Asia Minor.
Yes, the economic scale is hard for us to grasp today.
It held massive deposits of wealth. It employed thousands of priests, artisans, and merchants. The whole local economy ran on selling silver shrines of the goddess.
Which means the civic pride, the political leverage with Rome, and the raw financial stability of Ephesus were inextricably linked to the cult of Artemis.
So, put yourself in Timothy's shoes for a second. You are leading a small, radical startup community in the shadow of this behemoth. And your core message is, there is only one true God, and idols made with human hands are useless.
Right.
You aren't just engaging in a polite philosophical debate.
No, you are threatening the GDP of the city.
Exactly. You are bad for business. You are an economic threat, a political threat, and a social threat.
This creates an unimaginable psychological pressure on the early Christians. They were dealing with a civic religious identity entirely tied to status economics.
How so? Like, what happens to an average person who converts?
Well, if you converted to Christianity, you likely lost your trade guild membership.
Wow, so you lose your livelihood.
You lose your social standing entirely.
Yeah.
You were actually viewed as an atheist by the Romans because you rejected the gods that kept the city prosperous.
Knowing that completely changes how I read 1 Timothy. Like, when the letter obsesses over public decorum, when it demands that Christians live quiet, respectable lives, it's not because God loves boring people.
No, not at all.
It's because they are living in a pressure cooker.
Exactly. They are under a massive microscope. Every single public misstep by a Christian leader would be weaponized by the surrounding culture to crush the movement.
They were looking for any excuse.
Any excuse at all. So the demand for flawless public credibility isn't just about, moral purity. It's a sheer survival tactic in a deeply hostile urban environment.
That is so intense. So that is the massive headache Timothy is dealing with in Ephesus. Now let's look at the other major assignment. Titus was sent to Crete.
Right.
And the challenge there was entirely different.
Crete is a totally different case study. It's a massive island in the Mediterranean, strategically vital for sea routes.
The research highlights the principal Roman city there, Gordon. And there's a specific archaeological detail in the notes that I found absolutely mesmerizing.
Are you talking about the Great Code?
Yes,
Yeah.
of Good Gordon.
It is arguably one of the most important legal discoveries from the ancient world.
It's a massive law code, inscribed in stone, dating back to the mid-5th century BC. So hundreds of years before Titus even arrives, this society has its values literally carved into the walls of the city.
And laws are the ultimate mirror of a culture's soul, If you want to know what a society truly worships, look at what it regulates most strictly.
And what did the Code of Gordon regulate? Family, inheritance, marriage, divorce, and the strict maintenance of social status.
It reveals a society that was fundamentally obsessed with the household.
Obsessed.
In Crete, public ethics and domestic order were not separate categories at all. Your ability to manage your family, your property, and your slaves was the sole metric by which your civic worth was measured.
So it's a deeply entrenched, profoundly conservative legal culture.
Very much so.
So when Titus shows up with this new religious movement, the Cretans aren't asking, hey, is your theology philosophically sound?
No, they don't care about that.
They are looking at the Christians and asking, are your households chaotic? Are your marriages stable? Do you respect the social order?
Yes. And this is vital for understanding the Greco-Roman world as a whole, but Crete in particular. Everything ran on an honor-shame dynamic.
Let's really dig into that, because for a modern listener in a hyper-individualistic Western culture, honor and shame just sound like emotions.
Like an internal feeling.
Yeah, like I feel honored or I feel ashamed of what I did.
Right, but in antiquity, honor and shame were not internal feelings. They were external, tangible commodities.
Well, like currency.
Exactly like currency. Honor was your public reputation, your social capital. It determined who would trade with you, who your children could marry, and whether the courts would even listen to you.
And shame.
Shame meant social death. Full stop.
Wow. And the fundamental unit of this social capital wasn't the individual, right? It was the household.
Exactly. The paterfamilias, the male head of the household, bore the honor or the shame for everyone under his roof. His wife, his children, his clients, and his slaves.
Which brings us to a massively uncomfortable topic that we just cannot gloss over in this deep dive.
No, we have to face it head on.
If the household is the center of this society, we have to talk about slavery. Because these letters, specifically Titus 2 and 1 Timothy 6, address slaves and masters directly. They assume the existence of slavery.
It is undoubtedly one of the most difficult hurdles for modern readers.
And I want to challenge this directly, based on the research. If this movement was truly a radical, heaven-sent disruption, if it genuinely believed that all humans were made in the image of God, why didn't they launch a political abolition program right then and there?
It's a very natural question to ask.
Like, why the compromise? Why are there instructions telling slaves to respect their masters?
It is a profound and completely justified question. But to answer it, we have to strip away our 21st century political mechanisms and look at the brutal reality of the Roman Empire.
Yeah, paint the picture for me.
Slavery in Rome wasn't just a localized institution. It was the absolute bedrock of the entire global economy. Up to a third of urban populations were enslaved.
A third. That is staggering.
So if a tiny, marginalized Jewish sect suddenly declares a political war on the institution of slavery, what happens?
I mean, I assume Rome doesn't take kindly to that.
The Roman legions wipe them off the face of the earth? Literally. Rome's response to slave rebellions was crucifixion by the tens of thousands.
Right, like Spartacus.
Exactly. Spartacus proved that a frontal military or political assault on Roman slavery only resulted in mass slaughter.
So it would have been a suicide mission.
It would have extinguished the movement entirely on day one. So the analysis of these texts shows a completely different strategy.
What does the source material call it?
The notes call it a strategy to evangelize the social order from within.
Evangelize from within. How does that actually work? Because from the outside, frankly, it just looks like capitulation.
It looks like capitulation until you examine the actual theology they injected into the household.
Okay, explain that.
In Roman law, a slave was a thing, a piece of property with absolutely no legal rights, no spiritual agency.
Basically livestock.
Yeah. Exactly. But these letters address slaves as full moral agents. They instruct slaves to live honorably not out of terror of their earthly master, but to, quote, adorn the doctrine of God.
Wow. So it gives them agency.
They give the lowest rung of society profound theological dignity.
They elevate them to spiritual equals.
More than that. The letters insist that both slaves and masters are mutually accountable to a higher master in heaven who shows no partiality based on social class.
Wait. So they didn't launch a political revolt that would have gotten them all killed. Instead, they radically recentered the hierarchy.
Yes.
Think about it. If a master and a slave are taking communion together on a Sunday, recognizing each other as brothers in Christ, the philosophical justification for owning that person begins to rot from the inside out.
It was a slow-acting poison to the institution of slavery.
That's a great way to put it.
By insisting on mutual dignity and shared accountability, they planted the theological seeds that would eventually unravel the system entirely, even while navigating the brutal, unchangeable economic realities of the first century.
It's a total infiltration strategy. You don't blow up the building, you rewrite its DNA.
Exactly.
Okay, so with that massive socioeconomic reality established the cultic pressure of Ephesus and the reputation-obsessed legal culture of Crete. Let's look at the actual administrative blueprints provided in these texts.
Right. Let's start with 1 Timothy and how it tackles internal threats.
Timothy's first assignment is essentially establishing order in the court. And the immediate crisis isn't just pagan pressure from the outside, it's an internal infection.
False teachers.
Right, false teachers. The text specifically names guys like Hymenaeus and Alexander, who are described as shipwrecking the faith.
The historical research suggests these men weren't just bringing in like a slightly different interpretation of a Bible verse. They were introducing a toxic local syncretism.
And syncretism being, just for the listener, the blending of different, often contradictory religious ideas.
Yes. In the cosmopolitan melting pot of Ephesus, you had Jewish mysticism, Greek philosophy, and local cultic practices all bleeding into one another.
Just a messy soup of ideas.
Exactly. And the false teaching here appears to be a bizarre mix of extreme asceticism, like forbidding marriage, enforcing strict dietary laws combined, ironically, with a deep love of money.
Wait, asceticism and greed. That seems like a total oxymoron. Usually the people fasting in the desert aren't the ones trying to get rich.
Unless the asceticism is a performance designed to build a lucrative platform.
Ah, a grift.
Yes, a grift. And this highlights a crucial difference between how we view false teaching today and how the Pastoral Epistles viewed it.
How so? What's the difference?
Well, today, if someone says, oh, that person is a false teacher, we usually mean they have bad math.
Bad math.
Yeah, we view it as a purely intellectual error. They got the theological equation wrong. But in these ancient letters, false teaching is never just an intellectual mistake. It is an indictment of character.
Oh, I see. The doctrine is sick because the person is sick.
Exactly. The underlying assumption is that what you believe is inextricably bound to how you live. The text describes these teachers not just as confused, but as proud, greedy, and lacking self-control. They are monetizing religion. The intellectual error is merely a symptom of a disordered, corrupt heart.
Which makes the stakes so much higher for Timothy. He isn't just correcting a syllabus, he's trying to stop a moral contagion from wiping out the church.
He's performing triage.
And that brings us to perhaps the most controversial, hotly debated section of 1 Timothy for a modern reader.
I know exactly where you were going. You are referring to 1 Timothy chapter 2.
Yes, specifically verses 11 through 15, which contains strict gendered instructions regarding women and teaching. Now, listen carefully. Our goal here is not to solve a 2,000-year-old theological debate.
Definitely not.
Our job is to impartially report on how the historical research frames this text, because it is impossible to understand the letter's structure without addressing it.
It really is the ultimate interpretive crossroads for this document.
The eye of the storm centers on one specific Greek word, authentine. The research notes that this word is incredibly rare. It translates roughly to exercise authority or to dominate.
Right, but scholars are fiercely divided on what it actually implies in context.
The linguistic debate is intense. Does it mean the legitimate, ordinary exercise of leadership? Or does it carry a negative connotation, meaning to usurp, to domineer, or to violently seize control?
And how you define that word determines how you read the whole passage.
Right, and the source material outlines two distinct camps among interpreters. The first camp views this text as a transcultural, universal prohibition.
Under this view, the author is establishing a permanent structural rule for the church across all times and cultures.
Restricting certain teaching and authoritative offices to qualified men.
Yes, and they see it as rooted in an appeal to the creation order of Adam and Eve.
Right. But the second camp reads it entirely differently. They argue this is a context-specific, localized restriction.
They look back at the chaos of Ephesus. They point out that the cult of Artemis was heavily female-dominated and culturally disruptive.
Which we just talked about.
Exactly. So if the false teachers we just discussed were specifically targeting or utilizing wealthy women in the Ephesian church to spread their syncretistic heresy, then this command isn't a timeless rule for all women.
It's an emergency brake pulled to stop a specific local deception.
A localized quarantine, exactly.
So one side says it's an eternal blueprint, the other says it's a local quarantine. And again, we're not taking a side on that divide.
Right.
But what our source emphasizes, and this is the profound takeaway regardless of your theology, is that the author is deeply concerned with the public credibility of the church.
Everything comes back to that. The church is a fragile startup surrounded by a society just waiting for an excuse to crush it.
Right.
Whether the instruction is universal or localized, the motivation is order, the prevention of deception, and ensuring the Christian households do not give the hostile Roman culture a reason to slander the gospel.
Because if the movement is going to survive, it cannot look like the chaotic, greedy, disruptive cults that surrounded it. It has to look stable.
It needs leaders.
Which brings us to the actual qualifications for leadership in chapter 3.
Overseers and deacons.
Right, the Greek words are episkopos and diakonos. And I have to say, when I read the list of requirements for these jobs in the notes, it kind of shocked me.
Really? Why?
Because if you look at a modern corporate job posting for an executive, it's all about metrics. Must have 10 years of management experience, an MBA, and a proven track record of scaling revenue.
Right, it's all resume fluff. And how does 1 Timothy read?
It reads like a neighborhood character reference.
Yes.
It demands that a leader be above reproach, the husband of one wife, sober-minded, self-controlled, respectable, hospitable, and not a lover of money.
It is a stunning reversal of how the Roman world operated.
In what way?
Well, in antiquity, if you wanted a leadership position in a civic assembly or a pagan guild, the primary qualifications were wealth, charisma, and the ability to wield patronage.
Oh, so you bought your way in.
You bought your way into leadership by funding public works or hosting massive feasts.
But here, the resume is entirely domestic and moral.
Notice how heavily it relies on the household. The text says he must manage his own household well. Why? Because the church isn't viewed as a corporation. It is viewed as the macro household of God.
Right.
If a man cannot navigate the delicate honor, shame, and relational dynamics of his own living room, he cannot be trusted with the community's spiritual architecture.
The source material phrases this brilliantly. It says, office is not charisma without character. Character is the credential.
That phrase should be engraved on the doors of every modern institution, frankly.
I agree.
The early church understood that a charismatic visionary might start a movement, but only people of profound, boring, predictable integrity can actually sustain it.
Boring, predictable integrity. I love that so much. Okay, so we've seen how Timothy was instructed to build out the organizational chart in Ephesus. Now let's cross the Mediterranean again and check in on Titus in Crete.
Ah, the Cretan crisis.
Titus is dealing with an absolute mess. He is instructed to appoint elders in every town, but he's explicitly told he has to oppose these insubordinate, empty talkers and deceivers. The text says they are ruining whole households for the sake of dishonest gain.
So we see the exact same toxic mixture we saw in Ephesus.
Right. False teaching weaponized for financial profit.
Exactly, resulting in domestic chaos.
And remember the Code of Gorton. If your household is chaotic in Crete, your reputation in the city is completely destroyed.
It's social suicide.
So Titus isn't just dealing with a theological argument. He's dealing with a full-blown reputational collapse of the Christian movement on the island.
The surrounding culture looks at the Christians, sees greed and disorder, and logically concludes the message of Jesus is a fraud.
So what is the antidote? How does Titus fix a broken society? He doesn't do it with more administrative rules. He does it with a radical theology of grace.
This is such a pivotal moment in the text.
This is found in Titus chapter 2, and it completely broke my modern understanding of the word grace.
It is one of the most conceptually rich passages in the entire New Testament.
The text says, "For the grace of God has appeared, training us to renounce ungodliness and worldly passions, and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives."
Right.
I need to pause here, because when I hear the word grace in modern culture, it usually means a free pass.
Yes, leniency.
Yeah. Like, hey, I messed up. Show me some grace. It's a relaxation of the rules.
It is almost always presented as a cosmic pardon that requires nothing in return, a state of passive acceptance.
But this text says grace trains us. It acts like a disciplinarian. It is active, not passive.
The key to unlocking this is the Greek word translated as self-controlled. The word is shrosina.
Prososina. What does that actually mean?
It is a massive concept in ancient Greek philosophy. It means sound-mindedness, temperance, or moral sanity.
Moral sanity. That's good.
It is the opposite of being driven by erratic, impulsive passions. It is a life that is deeply internally ordered.
So grace isn't just God ignoring your flaws. Grace is the active force that produces strosina.
Exactly. The historical analysis notes that in this theology, grace is not morally inert. It is an active pedagogy.
A teaching tool.
Yes. When a person truly encounters the unmerited mercy of God, it doesn't make them lazy. It actively trains them to reject the chaotic, greedy lifestyle of the surrounding culture.
It produces a character that can actually survive the intense scrutiny of Crete. The text even says the goal of this disciplined living is so that the word of God may not be reviled. They are explicitly told to live in a way that is non-slanderous.
And this culminates beautifully in Titus chapter 3. The author wants to make sure this pursuit of moral excellence doesn't devolve into arrogant legalism.
Right, he doesn't want them getting a big head about their good behavior.
Exactly. So he clarifies the mechanism. He says salvation does not come by works of righteousness that we have done, but entirely according to God's mercy.
Right, so you can't earn it.
You cannot earn the root of salvation. But those who have received that mercy are then trained by grace to be zealous for good works.
Good works are the fruit, not the root of salvation.
Beautifully said. The root is the pure, unmerited appearance of the grace of God. But the necessary, inevitable fruit is a community of people whose lives are so remarkably ordered, so full of sophrosino, that it totally silences the critics in a skeptical, honor-shame society.
That completely flips the script on how we view religious rules. The good behavior isn't the price of admission, it's the evidence of transformation.
Exactly.
Okay, we have covered the administrative structuring of Ephesus and the behavioral training manual of Crete. But listener, I want you to prepare yourself, because the tone is about to shift dramatically.
A very hard pivot here.
We are moving to the final letter, to Timothy. And we are leaving behind the world of administrative blueprints and entering a space of profound, raw emotion.
It is the emotional and deeply personal climax of the pastoral corpus.
It feels so different from the other two.
It really does. 1 Timothy and Titus are focused outward, right, on the community and the public face of the church, but 2 Timothy is almost entirely internal.
The research frames this as a terminal letter. Whether you take the traditional view that this is literally Paul freezing in a Roman dungeon waiting for the executioner, or the critical view that it's a later literary homage, capturing his final ethos, the emotional weight is identical. The author is at the end of the line.
It is a farewell discourse. The language is framed by suffering, isolation, and the looming certainty of death.
We get that famous heart-wrenching summary. I have fought the good fight, I have finished the race, I have kept the faith.
It's beautiful.
It is beautiful, but it's spoken from a place of intense vulnerability. And what I found fascinating in the notes is the supporting cast mentioned in this letter.
The author provides this incredible roster of loyalty and betrayal.
Right. We hear about guys like Phygelus and Hermogenes who basically turned away from him when things got dangerous. But then there's a spotlight on a man named Onesiphorus. And the text says, he often refreshed me and was not ashamed of my chains.
To understand the true weight of that statement, we have to revisit the honor and shame dynamic we discussed earlier.
Because visiting a prisoner today might be inconvenient, but it's not culturally shameful.
But in the Roman world, it was incredibly dangerous.
Right.
Prisons like the Mamertine in Rome were essentially holding pens for the condemned, dark, freezing, squalid holes in the ground. If you were in chains, you were an enemy of the state.
You were untouchable.
You were the ultimate embodiment of social shame.
So for a friend to come looking for you.
To associate with a condemned man was to publicly take his shame onto yourself. It was social suicide. You risked being identified as a co-conspirator and thrown into the cell next to him.
Wow.
Onesiphorus represents the exact opposite of the fair-weather friends who preserved their honor and fled. He absorbed the shame of the chains out of pure loyalty.
He is the living embodiment of what the author is begging Timothy to do. Because the core message of 2 Timothy isn't about, setting up a church committee. It's an urgent plea for Timothy to be fiercely loyal to one specific thing.
And that thing is encapsulated in a vital Greek word, parathika.
Parathonka. This might be my favorite concept in the entire deep dive. The word translates to deposit or entrusted treasure.
It is a financial and legal term in the ancient world.
The analogy that immediately jumped to my mind is a trust fund.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah, when you read this letter, the gospel is not described as a personal self-help philosophy that you try out to see if it makes you happy. It is a highly valuable, irreplaceable asset. It has been deposited into your account, and you are legally and morally obligated to guard it with your life and eventually pass it on intact.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The research refers to this as the missional chain of custody.
Chain of custody. Huh?
Yes. The author knows he is dying. The charismatic founder is leaving the stage forever. The movement could easily die with him in that dungeon.
But the survival strategy isn't to build a massive stone monument to the founder.
No. The strategy is 2 Timothy 2.2. And what you have heard from me in the presence of many witnesses, entrust to faithful men who will be able to teach others also.
Just count the generations in that one sentence. What you heard from me, that's Paul and Timothy, generation 1 to 2, entrust to faithful men, generation 3, who will be able to teach others also, generation 4. 4 generations of a succession plan in a single breath.
It is the ultimate continuity plan. Theology in the Pastoral Epistles is not merely something you intellectually affirm. It is a paritheka, a deposit that must be guarded against corruption and actively handed down.
Well, wait, let me play devil's advocate here.
Sure.
If the survival of the movement relies entirely on this chain of human custody, like one guy telling the next guy who tells the next guy, how do you prevent the message from degrading?
The telephone game problem.
Exactly. It's like a multi-century game of telephone. Human memory is flawed. People corrupt things. How do you stop the paritheka from turning into something completely different 50 years later?
That is the existential crisis that 2 Timothy 3 directly addresses. The human chain of custody is essential, but it is deeply fallible. You need an objective anchor.
And the anchor is the text itself.
Exactly. This is where we get one of the most consequential passages in all of Christian history, 2 Timothy 3:16-17.
Oh, the God-breathed verse.
Yes. All Scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness.
Breathed out. It's such a visceral, physical image. It's not just saying God inspired some good ideas. It's claiming the text itself carries the breath, the very life force of the divine.
It is a stark claim of divine origin, but equally important is what the text says about the utility of Scripture. It says it is sufficient to equip the servant of God for every good work.
So when the founder is dead, when the chains are heavy, and when false teachers are twisting the truth, you don't need a new mystical revelation. You go back to the breathed-out text.
The written word becomes the permanent, incorruptible standard by which the paritheka is measured. It is the ultimate safeguard against the institutional drift we talked about at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Wow. Okay, we have covered an immense amount of ground today.
We really have.
We navigated the historical mysteries of who held the pen and the fragmented papyri of P46. We walked through the economic pressure cooker of the Artemis cult in Ephesus and the deeply traditional honor-shame legal codes of Crete.
It's a rich history.
It is. We saw how character was elevated over charisma, how grace trains us in self-control, and the immense emotional weight of passing on the trust fund of the gospel from a cold prison cell.
Right.
But as we start to land the plane here, we have to pull all this ancient history into the present. I want to ask the question on behalf of you, the listener. So what?
The big why does it matter?
Exactly. Why should a modern person living in a hyper-digital 21st century world care about a survival manual written for a first-century startup?
Because the human condition hasn't changed, and the mechanics of institutional decay haven't changed.
That's true.
To bridge that gap, we need to look at what the source material calls the healthy lexicon of these letters.
Right. There are 2 recurring Greek words that weave through all 3 of these letters, and they hold the key to why this matters today. The first word is hygienu.
Which is the root for our English word hygiene.
Right. In the text, it's translated as sound or healthy. You constantly see the author demanding sound doctrine or healthy teaching, and what's fascinating is the underlying medical metaphor there.
Yes, doctrine in these letters is not treated as abstract philosophy. It's not about passing a multiple-choice theology exam. It is biological.
Meaning, what you consume intellectually actually affects your spiritual health.
Precisely. Bad doctrine, like the greedy syncretism in Ephesus, is viewed as a pathogen.
Like a virus.
Exactly like a virus. It makes the community spiritually sick. It leads to division, arguments, and moral collapse. But hygieno, healthy doctrine, acts as nutrition. It makes the community robust, resilient, and capable of surviving hostility.
And what are the symptoms of a healthy community? That brings us to the second word, eusbeia.
Usually translated as godliness or reverence.
The historical synthesis here is beautiful. It argues that in the Pastoral Epistles, true Christian truth must produce visible, tangible piety. Orthodoxy, which is right belief, and holiness, which is right living, are inextricably fused together.
You literally cannot have one without the other. If someone claims to have brilliant theology, but their household is in shambles and they love money, their doctrine is diseased.
Now, I want to hold that up as a mirror to our modern world. If you look at the contemporary landscape of institutions, whether religious, political, or corporate, the warnings in these 2,000-year-old texts feel shockingly current.
They do. It's almost eerie.
Our source notes that these ancient letters speak forcefully against modern cultures, shaped by fragmentation, celebrity leadership, and doctrinal thinness.
It is a devastating critique of modernity. We constantly see institutions elevate leaders based entirely on platform size, charisma, and the ability to generate a crowd.
We hire for the fireworks, not the foundation.
Yes, and we completely ignore the quiet, domestic character qualifications that First Timothy demands. And what happens? The leaders inevitably collapse under the weight of their own lack of sophrosina.
Their lack of self-control.
Exactly.
We also see truth treated as either a boring academic exercise that has no impact on how we live, or worse, it's weaponized as a tool for culture wars, entirely divorced from eusbeia, from actual godliness and love.
When the connection between healthy teaching and godly living is severed, the public witness of the institution crumbles. The surrounding culture looks at the hypocrisy and turns away in disgust, just as they would have in ancient Crete.
The enduring lesson of the Pastoral Epistles is a harsh but necessary reality check. Truth cannot just be celebrated, it must be fiercely guarded. Leaders must be deeply tested for character, not merely celebrated for their gifts.
Right.
The movement absolutely must be administratively ordered, but it cannot become a hollow, bureaucratic shell.
It is an incredibly delicate, almost impossible balance to maintain. But history proves it is the only way a movement survives across generations without losing its soul.
And that brings me to a final thought I want to leave with you, the listener, today. It's drawn directly from the concluding reflections in Chris Velazquez's research.
That's a great thought.
When you read through all these ancient demands, the lists of qualifications, the strict household codes, the commands to silence false teachers, it can feel heavy. It can feel restrictive.
Sure, it can feel like a lot of red tape.
But the ultimate goal of all this structure wasn't just institutional preservation for its own sake. They weren't just trying to keep the lights on and pay the rent on a building.
No, there was a higher purpose.
The research notes state that all of this was fundamentally for the public glory of Jesus, framed by the eschatological hope of his return. The structure was built to protect the mission.
The walls protect the fire.
Exactly. So I want you to ponder this as you go about your week. When you look at your own life, at the structures, the daily disciplines, the boundaries, and maybe even the rules that you find yourself naturally resisting, what if those structures aren't there to restrict your freedom?
What if they're doing something else entirely?
What if, just like the Pastoral Epistles, those disciplines are the necessary, vital architecture designed to protect the most valuable, fragile deposits you've been entrusted with?
That is a profound shift in perspective. Viewing structure not as a cage, but as the guardian of the spark.
Perfectly said. Thank you for joining us on this incredible journey through the ancient world. Until next time, keep digging.